The silence of God is not absence. It is the most intimate presence veiled in mystery, the hidden breath that animates all things but refuses to speak in the language we expect. In the hollow space where we imagine God should answer, there is only silence. Yet it is in this very absence that the soul awakens, trembling before the abyss of its own depths. You have stood there before, staring into the vast, silent heavens, begging for a sign, aching for a word to break through the unbearable quiet, but nothing comes. And in your desperation you ask, has God turned away? Have I been abandoned? No, the silence is not rejection. It is invitation. It is the threshold of your own becoming. Carl Jung wrote, "The gods have become diseases. The external voices of the divine, once vivid and clear, now dwell within as complex as dreams, symbols. The age of external revelations has faded. We live now in the time of the inner journey, where God speaks, not from the clouds, but from the hidden sanctuary of your own unconscious. To face God's silence is to confront yourself, not the self you perform, not the image you curate for the world, but the deep ancient self that has waited quietly behind the walls of your defenses. Here begins the journey. The silence you fear is not empty. It is full of the things you have refused to face. In the absence of God's voice, the shadow rises. The parts of yourself you have exiled, the desires you have condemned, the fears you have buried, all emerge in the stillness. The silence strips away the noise that kept them at bay, and now they come, one by one, wearing faces you do not recognize, but that have always been yours. Jung called this the shadow. Everything about ourselves that we have not yet owned. It prowls the edges of consciousness, slipping into dreams, erupting in projections onto others, whispering in moments of weakness, but always kept outside the fragile walls of who we believe we are. But in the silence of God, these walls crack. The shadow seeps through, and you feel it. The rage, the envy, the despair, the unspeakable longing. It terrifies you, and yet this is the necessary terror of awakening. For thou art with me, says the psalmist, even in the valley of the shadow of death. The valley is within. The silence of God compels you to walk into that valley, to face the dark corners of your psyche, to look into the eyes of the parts of yourself you have most hated, and to say, you too are me. Only then does the silence begin to shift. The silence is not a void. It is the language of the unconscious. Jung knew that the unconscious speaks not in words, but in symbols, images, and dreams. God's silence is pregnant with these, waiting for you to stop demanding answers in your limited tongue, and instead to listen with the deeper ear of the soul. In your dreams, the unconscious lays its symbols before you. The storm that ravages your childhood home, the stranger who offers you a key, the endless staircase that you cannot climb. These are not mere fantasies. They are the living speech of the inner world, the language of what Jung called the archetypes, primordial forms that shape the very fabric of human experience. The silence of God becomes the stage upon which these archetypes dance. You see the mother, not only as the woman who bore you, but as the eternal archetype of nurturance and destruction. You encounter the hero, not only as the figure you admire in films, but as the part of you that dares to confront the impossible. You meet the trickster, the sage, the child, all within you, all speaking through the dreams you so often dismiss. To listen to yourself is to attend to these symbols, to allow them to guide you beyond the brittle confines of rational thought into the vast, mythic territory of the psyche. As the psalmist cries out, deep calls to deep. It is here, in the silence, that the depths of you answer the depths of God, not with words but with being. But the ego resists, the part of you that believes it is in control, that clings to certainty, that demands God appear in a form you can understand. It rebels against this silence. It screams into the void, and when the void does not echo back, it declares that there is no God. Yet it is the ego that must be silent now. Jung taught that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires the death of the ego's tyranny. It is not the annihilation of the ego, but its dethronement. The silence of God exposes the limits of the ego's rule. It forces you to realize that your carefully constructed identity is too small to contain the vastness of your true nature. And so in the silence, the ego fractures. This is why it feels like you are dying, because in a very real sense, you are. The false self must die so that the deeper self may emerge. This is the crucifixion of the old self. Be still, says Psalm 46:10, and know that I am God. Stillness, the surrender of the ego's compulsive activity, is the only way. Through the silence, not by force but by release, not by conquering the silence but by consenting to be transformed by it. In the stillness, after the ego's cries have faded, you begin to sense it, the presence that was never absent, not the God of your childhood, distant, judging, anthropomorphic, but the God beyond images, beyond names, beyond comprehension, the self. Jung saw the self as the totality of the psyche, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, human and divine. To encounter the self is to encounter God, not as an external authority, but as the very ground of your being. The silence of God was the voice of the self all along. You simply didn't know how to hear it, and now, in the stillness, you do. It is not a voice that speaks in sentences, but a presence that saturates you with a knowing beyond thought, a peace that surpasses understanding. The psalmist says, "In returning and rest you shall be saved. In quietness and in trust shall be your strength." You realize now that God's silence was never a punishment, but a summons, calling you home to yourself. You were not abandoned. You were being led deeper, but the journey does not end in the silence. To listen to yourself is not merely to find comfort, but to awaken to your purpose. The silence reveals not only who you are, but what you are called to become. You feel now the stirrings of your unique vocation, not a job, not a role imposed by society, but the authentic expression of your soul's deepest truth. Jung called this individuation, the unfolding of the individual into the fullness of their being. It is not conformity, but creativity, not obedience, but the courageous realization of your singular path. In the silence, you have met your shadow and reclaimed it. You have dethroned the ego and embraced the self. Now you must embody this transformation in the world. The silence has prepared you to speak, not as one who demands answers from God, but as one who has become an answer. You are now the vessel through which the silent God speaks into the world, through your choices, your creations, your love. And so you rise from the stillness not with certainty but with trust, not with a map, but with a compass, the inner knowing that has been forged in the crucible of silence. You walk now as one who has faced God's silence and, in doing so, has learned to listen to yourself. You no longer need the sky to split open with thunderous proclamations. You have heard the quiet whisper within, and you know that it is enough. For in the end, the silence of God is not a void to be feared, but a womb from which your true life is born. "Behold," says the voice in Revelation, "I make all things new." The silence has made you new, and now you walk into the world, whole, awake, alive, listening, always listening. The silence is now your companion, not your adversary. Where once you fled from it, now you sit beside it like an old friend who has patiently waited through all your years of frantic searching, your desperate prayers, your restless seeking. You realize with a shudder and then a breath that all along it was not the silence that was unbearable, it was your own refusal to hear what it had been offering you. For in the silence there are no masks, no roles, no defenses, only truth, naked and unadorned, waiting for your courage to be equal to it. The silence is the forge of authenticity. Jung wrote, "Only what is really oneself has the power to heal." And this is the deepest revelation of all, that healing does not come from some external force swooping in to rescue you, but from your own willingness to stand undefended before your inner reality, to face what you have feared most about yourself, and to embrace it with compassion. The silence strips you down to this core, and you see, you are wounded, yes, but you are also whole, broken, but beautiful, small, but also infinite. You are a paradox, a mystery, a microcosm of the very God you once thought was silent and distant, but now know as near as your own breath, as intimate as your own heartbeat. The silence taught you that God was not gone. God had descended into the depths of your being, waiting there, in the shadow, in the longing, in the suffering, for you to return. Like the prodigal son in the parable, you had wandered far, seeking fulfillment in every voice but your own, in every answer but the one whispered within. And when all else failed, when the world's noise grew hollow, when your strength was exhausted, you collapsed into that silence, and there you found the Father running to meet you, clothed not in lightning and fire, but in the quiet presence of your own self, welcoming you home. This is the reconciliation that the silence makes possible, the healing of the split between who you are and who you were, always meant to be, the restoration of the lost fragments of your soul, the integration of the shadow, the surrender of the ego, the awakening of the self. And now, standing in this place of inner wholeness, you begin to hear the silence not as absence, but as song, a deep, resonant hymn that has been singing you into existence all along. The psalmist said, "The Lord will command his loving kindness in the daytime, and in the night his song shall be with me." That song is the silence, a melody too profound for words, too vast for comprehension, but unmistakably present. It is the song that carried you through the valley of the shadow of death, that whispered to you in your dreams, that guided you through the labyrinth of your unconscious, and now leads you out into the light of a new day. But the journey of listening does not end here, for to truly listen to yourself is to become responsible for what you have heard. You cannot return to the life you lived before, a life dictated by external expectations, by the projections of others, by the fear of not being enough. No, you have seen too much. You have known the silence too deeply. You have heard the voice within, and it calls you to live in alignment with the truth you have have uncovered. This is the great and terrible demand of individuation, to live your own life. Not the life your parents wanted for you, not the life society celebrates, not the life your ego fantasizes about, but the life that is authentically, uniquely, unrepeatably yours. This is the narrow path that Christ spoke of, the path that few find because it requires the death of illusion and the birth of truth. It requires courage, because to live in fidelity to your inner voice is to risk misunderstanding, rejection, even isolation, but it also offers the only real freedom, the freedom of being who you truly are. As Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and that privilege is earned in the silence, in the willingness to stop running, stop performing, stop numbing yourself with distractions, and to finally courageously listen, to stand naked before the mystery of your own soul and say, "Here I am," and to hear in response, not in words, but in the deep, silent knowing, the echo of the divine. Yes, this is who you are. Now every step you take is accompanied by that inner presence. You are no longer lost in the wilderness of noise and confusion. You walk with intention, with awareness, with a quiet confidence born not of certainty but of trust. You know that the silence will return, as it must, in different seasons, at unexpected times, and when it does, you will no longer fear it. You will welcome it as the sacred space where growth happens, where transformation begins anew. You will recognize it as the voice of God calling you deeper still, beckoning you beyond the known, beyond the comfortable, into ever greater wholeness. The silence is now your teacher, your guide, your friend, and you, once terrified of being alone with yourself, have become one who listens, truly listens, not just to the surface chatter of your mind, but to the profound depths of your soul, where God and self meet in silent communion. This is the gift of the silence. This is the wisdom it offers, and this is the path it calls you to walk, now and always. Go, then, not in fear, but in faith, not seeking to escape the silence, but to dwell within it, to be shaped by it, to be made whole through it. And when you find yourself once more standing in the stillness, longing for a voice, aching for an answer, remember, the silence is not absence, it is presence waiting to be heard. Listen, and you will know. You will know that you are not alone. You never were. You never will be. For the silence has always been, and will always be, the sacred space where your soul and God embrace in a communion beyond all words, beyond all understanding, beyond all fear. Be still, and listen. And so, the silence becomes the sanctuary where all striving ceases. No more do you chase after the elusive approval of others. No more do you exhaust yourself in pursuit of roles, titles, and accomplishments that were never truly yours. The silence has stripped all that away, leaving only what is essential, only what is eternal. You are left with your breath, with your being, with the simple, undeniable fact of your existence. Here, now, in this moment, the ancient wisdom of Ecclesiastes echoes in your mind. To everything there is a season, a time to keep silence, and a time to speak. You understand now that your life is not about constant doing, constant noise, constant achievement. It is about rhythm, about knowing when to speak and when to be silent, when to act and when to wait, when to push forward and when to surrender. This is the wisdom the silence has given you, a wisdom the world does not teach, but your soul has always known. In the silence, you have discovered the sacred art of waiting, of abiding, of trusting, that what is meant for you will come, not through force or manipulation, but through alignment with the deep currents of your own nature, the movements of grace that flow quietly beneath the surface of all things. As the psalmist writes, "My soul waits silently for God alone, for my expectation is from Him." And now you know what that means. Not waiting as passivity, but as an active, conscious surrender to the flow of life. Not silence as absence, but as the profound, fertile ground in which the seeds of your true self have been planted, germinated, and now begin to break through the soil, reaching for the light. The silence has also taught you about suffering, not as something to be avoided at all costs, but as something to be transmuted. You have learned that pain too is a kind of silence, the body and soul's way of signaling that something essential has been neglected, forgotten, or lost. You no longer rush to numb the pain, to cover it up with distractions, with busyness, with false certainties. Now you sit with it, you listen to it, you ask what it has come to teach you, and you realize that even suffering is not meaningless when met with awareness and compassion. As Jung taught, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. You have come to understand that the darkness you feared was not your enemy, it was your initiation. The silence forced you to confront it. The silence led you into the night of the soul, the place where all illusions die, and only what is true remains. And there in that holy darkness, you found the flicker of a light that was never extinguished, though you had long forgotten it. The light of your own essence, the light of the divine spark within you. It was there all along, waiting for you to be still enough, silent enough, courageous enough to see it. Now, you carry that light with you, not as a torch held high to ward off the darkness, but as a quiet flame within, steady and unwavering, illuminating your path from the inside out. You have realized, too, that the silence of God is not unique to you. Every human heart knows this silence in some form. Every soul, at some point, cries out into the void, "Why have you forsaken me?" And yet that cry is not the end. It is the beginning of a deeper knowing, a more authentic relationship with the divine, one that is not based on childish expectations of protection from all harm, but on the mature understanding that God is with you even especially in, the places where God seems most absent. This is the paradox that the silence reveals, that God is both the voice that calls you forward and the silence that draws you inward, both the comforter and the wound, both the presence and the absence, and that in embracing this paradox, in no longer demanding that God be only what you want him to be, you open yourself to the fullness of the divine mystery, to a love that does not coddle, but liberates, to a presence that does not shield you from pain, but empowers you to transcend, or to a wisdom that does not give you easy answers, but invites you into the lifelong, sacred work of becoming. You have become a pilgrim of the silence. You walk now with a quiet reverence, knowing that every moment, whether filled with sound or stillness, is an opportunity to listen more deeply, to align more fully, to live more authentically. You no longer fear the times when the heavens are silent, when prayers seem to go unanswered, when life feels barren and empty, for you know that those are the very moments when the soul is being expanded, stretched beyond its previous limits, prepared to receive more than it ever imagined. You understand now that the silence is not a detour, it is the path, the narrow way, the road that leads not to comfort, but to transformation, not to certainty, but to wisdom, not to safety, but to freedom. Silence has become your home, and from this home you can go anywhere. You can face anything. You can live fully, love deeply, risk everything, because you are rooted in something deeper than all the passing noises of the world. You are rooted in the eternal silence that is the very voice of God. And now, as you stand at the threshold of whatever comes next, you take a deep breath. You close your eyes. You listen, not for the booming voice of heaven, not for the signs and wonders you once craved, but for the subtle, steady pulse of life within you, the quiet knowing that you are exactly where you need to be, that you are becoming exactly who you were made to be. You smile, perhaps for the first time in a long time, not because all your questions have been answered, but because you are finally at peace with the mystery. You are finally at peace with the silence, and in that peace, you hear it, softly, unmistakably, the voice you have been waiting for all along, your own, risen from the silence, born from the depths, calling you forward, onward, deeper still, and you know beyond all doubt that this voice, your voice, is, and always has been, the very echo of the divine. The silence was never the absence of God, it was the place where you met him, and where you finally met yourself. Now, go live, listen, and never again be afraid of the silence. And so you walk, not away from the silence, but carrying it within you like a sacred relic, a hidden sanctuary that no storm, no voice, no chaos of the world can dismantle. The world, in its clamor, will attempt to distract you again. It will shout its false promises, offer its empty comforts, entice you to forget what you learned in the quiet, to abandon the treasure you unearthed in the solitude of your own soul. But you know now, nothing in the world can replace the stillness where you encountered yourself, where you met the ineffable presence that dwells beneath all things. This is your unshakable ground. This is your fortress, not made of stone, but of silence and strength. You hear the ancient echo of Psalm 46 once, "More be still and know that I am God." But now it is not merely a verse, it is an invocation. It is your way of being. Stillness is no longer foreign to you. Silence no longer threatens you. They are your allies, your teachers, your companions on the ongoing journey of individuation, that long spiraling path of becoming fully human, fully divine, fully yourself. For you understand now what Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Not the self that conforms, that pleases, that perform, but the self that waits silently beneath all layers of personality, all masks, all roles. That self is now awake. The silence has done its holy work. It dismantled your illusions, confronted your shadow, dethroned your ego, and unveiled your deepest essence. You realize now that what you had once perceived as God's silence was, in truth, the most profound communion possible, one that transcends language, bypasses intellect, and penetrates straight to the core of your being. Words would have been too small, too fragile to contain what needed to be revealed. Only silence was vast enough. Only silence could hold the sacred weight of your becoming. And so you no longer rush to fill the quiet moments with sound. You no longer fear the spaces between thoughts, the long pauses in conversation, the empty hours when nothing demands your immediate attention. You welcome them now as invitations. Each silence is a threshold, each pause, a doorway to deeper presence. You know now that listening is not merely quietly, waiting for your turn to speak. It is an act of reverence. It is a posture of openness to the divine, in the world, in others, and within yourself. You see now that every person you meet is also longing for the courage to face their own silence. Some are still running from it. Some are still filling their lives with noise to avoid what they might hear in the stillness. But you are different now. You can sit with them in their silence, unafraid. You can hold space for their pain, their longing, their confusion, because you have held space for your own. You have walked through the valley of your own soul, and you have emerged, not unscathed, but whole. The scars you carry are sacred. They remind you of the battles you fought in the unseen realms of your psyche, of the nights you spent wrestling with God in the silence, of the moments you thought you might not survive the absence, but did. And now, these scars are not marks of shame, but of wisdom. They are the signs of one who has descended into the depths and returned, bearing gifts for the world. You are no longer merely a seeker of silence. You have become an embodiment of it. You carry within you the calm of one who knows that they are held by something larger than themselves, something that cannot be named, cannot be contained, but is always present, always sustaining, always calling you deeper. This is your center now, your axis mundi, and the still point around which all the storms of life may rage, but which remains unshaken. And from this center, you move through the world differently. You speak less, but when you do, your words carry weight. You act less impulsively, but when you do, your actions are aligned with your deepest values. You love more fully, because you no longer love out of need or fear, but out of the overflowing abundance of one who has found their home within themselves. You live more freely, because you are no longer enslaved by the fear of being alone, by the terror of God's silence, by the desperate need for external validation. You have found your freedom in the most unlikely of places, in the very silence you once tried to escape, and you know now, without doubt, that the journey will continue. The silence will call you back again and again in new ways, through new seasons of your life. Each time, it will strip away what is no longer necessary. Each time, it will ask you to surrender more. Each time, it will invite you to become even more fully yourself. And each time you will go, not because you are fearless, but because you have learned that fear is not a reason to turn away, but a signal that something holy waits beyond the threshold. You will return to the silence not as a stranger, but as a pilgrim. You will kneel once more in the sacred stillness, not demanding answers, but offering yourself in trust. And in that quiet offering, you will find once again the voice you had forgotten, the voice that has been there all along, waiting patiently for you to be still enough, silent enough, courageous enough to hear your own voice, the voice of the self, the voice of God, indistinguishable, inseparable, eternally intertwined. This is the mystery you now live. This is the truth you now embody. And as you step forward into whatever the future holds, you do so with the unshakable knowing that you are never truly alone, never truly lost, never truly abandoned, for you have learned how to face God's silence. And in doing so, you have learned how to listen, profoundly, reverently, courageously count to yourself, and that is enough, always and forever, enough.